Okay. Hello, probably YouTube and or like other social media platforms. I wanted to make a video because I have been thinking a lot lately. Lately being like the last 1 or 2 weeks, about three things in particular. Two of them I think about a lot. One kind of has been added into the mix, but those three things are oppression, nonviolent communication, and call out culture. Um, so let's see. We'll start with nonviolent communication. If you're unfamiliar, nonviolent communication is this kind of like theory of communication and conflict resolution, problem solving, whatever, really created by this guy, Marshall Rosenberg. He wrote a great book about it, and he does like workshops with people. But this thing called nonviolent communication is comprised of four components, and those four components would be like if something happens, you make an observation about what happened. You say how you feel based off of what happened. You say what you need or what need is not being met in this situation. And then you request a different behavior in the future. So it's that observation, feeling, need, and request. I have read the book and I've done a number of trainings with like AmeriCorps programs on nonviolent communication, and I think it's a really important conflict resolution framework. He kind of like Marshall Rosenberg, with his theory of nonviolent communication, is really trying to emphasize his belief that violence is not just physical or even just like being like a straight up like verbally threatening someone, but that we can speak violently very unintentionally when trying to communicate with each other. Yeah, so for people who are like unfamiliar with nonviolent communication, I highly recommend like looking into it. It's absolutely radical. It's very challenging to kind of like get it down and to incorporate it on a daily basis into your life and like every interaction you have. Like, truthfully, I don't think even Marshall Rosenberg, who came up with this theory, can do that. I know like I fuck up all the time with nonviolent communication. I try my best, but typically it's like after something happens and after the first conversation about it that I'm like, oh, okay, let's try this again. But anyway, so we have that in mind, right? We have our nonviolent communication in mind. Now let's go to oppression. So let's see. I have been, for the last 4 or 5 years, kind of really immersed in alternative culture, alternative to capitalism culture. I'm very much not a proponent of capitalism, just to like get that out there. I think it's racist. I think it's violent. I think it's just terrible. I think it's evil. To just say it, I think capitalism is evil. But so over the last 4 or 5 years, I have done a lot of things that have allowed me to travel and to meet people who are from all different parts of the country and of the world. All my traveling has been in the United States, but it's still been like very, very formative. And, you know, I think every single part of the United States is absolutely different from every other part. Yeah, but so thinking about oppression, to not get too down the rabbit hole or in the weeds, a lot of people who think of the word oppression, I think, at least people who are like liberals, mostly view oppression under the context of like our self-prescribed identities, or identities that like other people see you as, right? So like, for example, I am a white lesbian woman. So that gives me kind of two ways in which I can be oppressed, lesbian woman, and then one way in which I can be oppressed based, or one way that I can be an oppressor based off of just like my social identity, right, as a white lesbian woman. But there's a really crucial thing to think about, in my opinion, and in the opinion of like a lot of people, honestly, when you are thinking about oppression, and that has to do with class. Just gonna be really honest about this. I am very fascinated by socialism. I'm very fascinated by communism. I already mentioned I don't like capitalism. I think capitalism oppresses everyone who is not the capitalist who owns the factory or the bank or the whatever means of production. Anyone who is not an owner in our capitalist society is oppressed. Okay, so that's another factor in this like umbrella of oppression that we're gonna think about. But yeah, no, so we'll leave that there. Actually, no, we won't leave that there. I think the class and where you work, how you earn your money, is actually one of the most important things to consider when we are thinking about oppression. Like, if you live in the United States, I'm only going to speak about the United States because I've only ever went to Canada, and that's probably very similar to the United States. But if you live in the United States and you have a job and you buy food and you live in a home or rent an apartment, and you either have paid for that home and got like a mortgage, or you rent your apartment, you have to work like quite a lot to make that happen successfully, because the cost of living is like very high. And because of that, we spend most of our lives at work. If you work full time, you're working 40 hours in a week, and that'll mostly be for people 5 days a week, 8 hours in that day. How many hours are you awake? You see what I'm getting? Like, most of our waking lives are spent at work for most average people, unless you're some kind of radical hitchhiking, traveling, cool person who like, can get by without working. And I will be the first to admit there are many people who can do that and make that work. And yeah, there's definitely like alternatives to this like working all the time kind of model, but most people kind of don't do that. Most people have jobs, have homes, apartments. Yeah. So when we're thinking about the amount of time that we spend at work and kind of like how that informs our identities, our perceptions of ourselves, as well as our perceptions of the people around us and the world at large, like it's kind of quite profound. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I might have lost that kind of train of thought, but I just think it's very important to consider. Actually, we're gonna dive in a little bit more. So like, if you are a trash collector, okay, and you work 40 hours a week, although most people probably don't work 40 hours a week actually because, well, at least from one employer, because full-time employment is like really hard to find, because if you're fully employed, your employer has to give you health insurance. Anyway, so say hypothetically you work full-time as a trash collector for one trash collecting company, and that's like all you do all the time. Like, people look at you differently. Like, people treat you some kind of way because of the job that you have. I work at a YMCA. I work at the front desk, okay? Even at the front desk, just like saying hi to people, setting them up with memberships, having them cancel their memberships. People treat me differently because I'm in a customer service, a job, right? Customer service job. That is like kind of like an impact of class. The way that like individuals who you encounter either on the job or off the job treat you based off of your job. Also, and this is wild to me, I live in Denver right now, but I'm from California, and I worked on Thanksgiving and I didn't receive holiday pay. I was given the option of like signing up to work that day, but somebody had to work because we were open that day, and no one who worked that day was paid time and a half. And like, that's never been the case for me, and that's oppression. You are literally being oppressed in that instance. To me, I always thought it was kind of like a standard that if you work on a holiday, you get paid a little bit more. Anyway, I'm on a huge tangent, but yeah, so when we think about oppression, let's also keep in our minds that it's not just how you identify yourself. I don't go up to tell people like, I am a membership services employee at the YMCA. That's not like one of the first things that I tell people. I don't strongly identify with that part of my life, but it still impacts me, okay? So now we're going to move into call-out culture. I read a really awesome article from Jacobin last week. Let's see, I pulled it up so I could say the name of it. Okay, it's called Under Neoliberalism, You Can Be Your Own Tyrannical Boss. And it's by Megan Day. So like essentially, this article is talking about the impacts of neoliberalism and meritocracy on our individual mental health and the way that we like interact with each other. Specifically, it was talking about those of us who fall like left of center politically, but for like people at large. I guess also let me add in, there was a focus on the impact of those things, neoliberalism and meritocracy, on mental health in millennials. Okay, so in the article, Megan Day, or I'm sorry, I'm saying her name wrong. Yeah, Megan Day. She mentioned call-out culture. Okay, I just learned about call-out culture earlier this summer. I had listened to a podcast it was an Invisibilia podcast, I think, and they were talking about call-out culture in like the punk scene in like, I think it was in Richmond, Virginia, maybe. And like, I didn't know what it was, but like it's pretty easy to like understand when someone explains or when they say the word or the phrase call-out culture. You're like, oh, okay. The like surge in the amount of people who now feel comfortable and empowered to like call someone out on some kind of like behavior that they're doing or something that they're saying that is harmful to someone else, or that feels harmful to someone else, right? And so it was a really good podcast. I recommend that everyone goes and listens to the podcast. I don't know what it was called, but if you search Invisibilia Callout culture, you know, you'll find it. But so if we're thinking about like people's mental health, callout culture is actually like really damaging for your mental health. And, you know, for me, since I think about nonviolent communication a lot, callout culture and nonviolent communication do not work together whatsoever. And I just like, in Megan Day's article, or in her piece, she talked about how fractured the left is. And, you know, she wasn't entirely blaming it on callout culture, but in her bringing up callout culture, she was definitely acknowledging that callout culture, like, you better be careful what you say. You better make sure you don't offend anybody. If you fuck up, you're fucked up. You can't, like, there's a religious word. You can't be, I can't do it. You can't be forgiven. Like, you can't acknowledge that you messed up. And that's just, like, harmful. Like, how would you feel if, or how do you feel? Because I'm sure this has happened to anyone who is watching this video. How would you feel if, like, or how have you felt, I should say, when you've done something that you, like, or done something or said something that you didn't think about too much before you did it, and then, like, after you did or said the thing, you kind of realize, like, damn, I should not have said or done that. That was terrible. But, like, instead of someone kind of, like, calmly, like, saying, like, hey, like, why did you say that thing? I'm just kind of, can we, like, talk about it? They just, like, attack you, and they're like, you're a shitty person. You suck. You're terrible. You're evil. You're sexist. You're racist. You're homophobic. Whatever it is. You know, like, how have you felt, like, when something like that has happened to you? Yeah, so, I don't know. I could probably keep rambling on and on and on about these things, but I'm very caffeinated and continuously losing my actual train of thought, and I'm mostly just kind of like ranting from the heart right now, you know. But yeah, I just kind of like, I think there's a number of people who are like thinking about this right now, especially since that article came out. But just I just think we on the left need to be more kind to each other. You know, like, whether you're like an anarchist or a socialist or a communist or like whatever you are, if you're like, however you identify yourself, if you're a libertarian or like, I literally don't care. We need to be more kind to each other. It just like, we're never going to have any sort of like a better world if we can't be more kind to each other. And like, I'm guilty of like the like negativity of the call out culture. I'm calling myself out on that. But yeah, I think there's so much like potential for like revolution, just to like be blunt about it. There's so much potential for revolution, and we're just kind of like, we're letting it slip past us because we're getting divided over like things that like they matter, but we're addressing them in harmful, violent, aggressive ways. And like, you can be direct with someone but be like nonviolent about it. I guess one other thing I just like remembered all of a sudden, I was at a Democratic Socialists of America meeting on Saturday, and they passed out like a community guideline for the meeting. And one of the things was talking about being respectful and challenging people, like assuming the best intent, but like if someone says something that you kind of are like, wait, what? Like, challenge them, but be respectful about it. And it straight up said, like, instead of calling people out, call them in, you know, be inclusive about it. It's the classic thing, like, you can't fight fire with fire. And trust me on that, I was a wildland firefighter. That's not actually the best metaphor. Sometimes wildland firefighters do use fire to fight fires. But that's like a very unideal situation. But yeah, my closing point is just like, I want to see more people talking about this and really, really reflecting upon this. I think there's a lot of really intelligent people who have kind of like fallen into the like trap of call out culture. And people who are probably just really like unaware of nonviolent communication, and like what it is and its applications, and people who also like just like stay on the surface level with oppression and don't really want to think about like the class oppression that kind of is like, you know, a huge factor when we're thinking about oppression. Like, I guess I'm going to make one note. I know I'm trying to close, but one note on my oppression thing. There's a gentleman named Benjamin Davis who's no longer alive. He's an African American. I think he studied law, but he was like the mayor of New York for a little bit. He was openly communist. He got booted out of New York's city council, probably for being openly communist. I think he was a lawyer after that, or yeah. Anyway, I just read a thing by him just last week called "Why I Am a Communist," and he was talking about intersectionality in there, and like if we're talking about like oppression, he was talking about the double exploitation was like the phrase that he used of the black worker versus the white worker, right? So like he's acknowledging that the white worker is being oppressed. However, the black worker is being more oppressed. They're both being exploited, but there's like a further exploitation, right? So just to like make that clear, like I do 100% believe that your like social identity plays a role in your work and how you are exploited as a worker and oppressed as a worker, but everyone who is a worker is oppressed. And I just think that we need to like really, really, really keep that in mind, because like the fact that we are the working class, that is how we should like unite together. We're all in this. We're all working. We're all fighting. We're all struggling. Yeah, I don't know. This has been quite a twisting and turning thing, but just really needed to like cathartically get it out. And yeah, I hope that someone gets something from this. If you disagree with me, please like, I don't know, comment on it or like shoot me a message. Yeah, I'll post the links for the podcast and the article that I was referring to, just so that like, you know, we can all be on the same page more or less. But yeah, I welcome further discussion on this, regardless of your stance. So yeah, alrighty. Thanks for listening to my rant.